The one responsible for this stood atop a building looking down. Who else but Sophie Marty, using her mirror doppelganger technique. Even though these doppelgangers only had the strength of A-rank disciples, a swarm of ants could still bring down an elephant. Especially since there were only 2 people inside that appraisal shop, one old and one young. Sung-jae sprinted back toward the shop, and as soon as he saw the Holy Maiden's bodyguard, he shouted at her. "Why are you using combat skills in a neutral zone? Cancel it immediately." She turned around, casually holding an intricately carved cup, and told him to shut his mouth since it was a direct order from the Holy Maiden. She placed the holy chalice on the ground, activating the relic and making it glow intensely. Sung-jae panicked and lunged forward to stop her, but it was too late. A pillar of light shot straight up into the night sky like a Big Bang concert. Dozens of water streams rose from the ground, swirling into large circles that surrounded everyone on the street, replicating water ghosts from all those people. The bodyguard ordered them to go take care of Jin Myung together, while she would personally handle the young guest inside the shop. The water ghosts immediately followed orders, turning into the slimy liquid that Jian had noticed dripping earlier. Sung-jae struggled within a water bubble, frantically trying to figure out when they had planned this attack. His palms tried to summon power, desperate to escape before passing out. His vision blurred as his eyes began to close. Everywhere around him was just water, an endless sea of water. At that moment, Jion, inside the shop, had already realized that the water containing magic wasn't from rain seeping in. He silently watched it drip down more and more. Jin Myung also sensed the magic around him, and while he was still looking around trying to understand what was happening, the water suddenly coiled like ropes and lifted him into the air. Something sharp flashed from behind, cutting Jion's neck, but he didn't look particularly surprised. The bodyguard whispered, "Don't move." She didn't want to kill him just yet, and explained that this was all because he had displeased the Holy Maiden. She warned him that resisting would only speed up his death, so he better not be foolish. The Holy Maiden ordered her to kill both of them, but if they were willing to apologize, and if Jin Myung bought the relic at a high price, she would put in a good word with Sophie. What a kind-hearted bodyguard, threatening people with a knife, while offering a negotiation so generous it nearly put the appraiser to sleep. Suddenly, Jion's bored voice asked if carrying a knife around the streets was considered normal now. Jin Myung's eyes widened as he watched Jion snap the knife's blade into pieces with just 2 fingers. Maybe he was getting old. Back in his day, no one dared to carry weapons around like this. Jion dropped the knife on the floor and chuckled, telling Jin Myung to start calculating how much damage they would need to compensate for. Seeing Jion break the Aquarius relic knife so easily and seemingly siding with him, Jin Myung still didn't dare say a word. What kind of person could do that barehanded? The bodyguard irritably replied, "Didn't I tell you not to move?" The mass of water spirits behind Myung gathered into a blob and shot towards Jion, intending to silence him, but when they reached him, with just one punch, Jion had scattered them all over the floor. Still wearing that friendly smile, he asked, "Got any more? Call them out. This is actually kind of fun to punch." The female bodyguard took a few steps back, cautiously eyeing the young man before her. Just as the Holy Maiden had predicted, anyone who could take down A-rank water spirits barehanded was no ordinary person. If that's the case, she had to eliminate him to protect the Holy Maiden, and that nonchalant attitude he had when talking to Jin Myung was infuriating. She pulled out the necklace Sophie had given her from inside her robe and unleashed a wave of pure magical water directly infused by Sophie herself. The pools of water gradually took the shape of a pack of wolves, which, according to the bodyguard, were the amber-ranked water wolves. Trying to use amber rank to deal with Jion was a joke. It would just make him laugh. That bug, Sophie sure knows how to put on a grand welcome for him. Out of nowhere, Jion pulled out 2 daggers and asked Jin Myung if he could borrow these knives for a bit, considered that he said he could take anything he liked. Without even waiting for an answer, Jion charged forward like a bullet, single-handedly taking on the aggressive pack of water wolves. Everywhere he went, he sealed their mouths shut, shouting with delight, "These knives are pretty sharp. I like them. I give them a thumbs up." Each slice of his blade not only tore through the water wolves, but also fed him information on Aquarius's magical properties. Switching into full butcher mode, Jion gleefully hacked away at the A-rank creatures, laughing loudly. Who knew appraising items could be this much fun? With each cut, he looted the remains of the mirror doppelgangers, gained experience points, and collected all sorts of strange things related to the water wolves. The Holy Maiden's subordinate, who probably had some level of combat experience, now stood frozen in disbelief. How could the Holy Maiden's summoned beasts be slaughtered so easily? Hey, you! Hey! Jion's shout made her nearly jump out of her skin. Is this guy the final boss of some villain arc, or what? She was utterly terrified by how thrilled Jion was at the slaughter, asking if she had anything else to throw at him. His eyes were like those of a ferocious beast, and she couldn't even take a single step, let alone respond. Realizing she stood no chance against this man, she turned and fled in terror. Jion didn't bother chasing her. He only wasted energy on stubborn opponents, not cowards like her. Jin Myung watched him with a grave expression, but before he could say anything, the door burst open with Sung-jae screaming at the top of his lungs. The poor guy was soaking wet, barreling in to warn that an Aquarius's disciple had gone on a rampage. He was shocked to find the appraisal shop in complete disarray after Jion's massacre. Aren't these the Holy Maiden's summoned beasts, the Aquarius's water wolves? Well, that's what they were to others, but to Jion, they were just piles of loot for him to collect. Sung-jae urged him to leave quickly before the guards returned with reinforcements, which would be a huge hassle. Just as they were about to go, Jin Myung suddenly shouted, causing them both to turn around. The old man hesitated for a moment before blurting out, 20 years ago, I used to follow someone named Lee Jion to learn crafting methods. I remember very clearly how he fought monsters and collected materials. Could it be? Are you Lee Jion? Jion didn't respond. Instead, he raised his index finger to his lips and motioned for silence, signaling for him to keep it down. But with that expression on his face, it was obvious even without saying it, no need for the mysterious act. Jin Myung's overly sentimental and poetic soul instantly caught the signal, and he burst into tears of joy. Jion turned away and said they'd talk more next time. That was enough to make Jin Myung so happy he stopped crying, bowing deeply, and shouting, I look forward to seeing you again, esteemed customer. Jion gave a slight nod and left, leaving behind the mess in the shop for the old man, a highly effective way to avoid cleanup duties. After leaving the appraisal shop, Sung-jae and his uncle Gyeon found a surprisingly fitting place to hide from any pursuit, a brightly lit cafe in the middle of the street that sold all kinds of ice cream and pastries. Despite being 40 years old, Gyeon was gleefully spooning huge bites of ice cream into his mouth. Sung-jae, this is so good. Eat more. Have as much as you want. Watching Gyeon's determination to finish all the food on the table, Sung-jae hesitantly asked, Yeah, it's tasty, but it's obviously super expensive. Do you have the money to pay for it? Of course, Gyeon didn't have any money, but his looting skills were top-notch. He pulled out something the female guard had dropped, saying he'd inspected it for a while and figured it could be useful. The gold-colored item with a water-pouring logo looked like an Aquarius emblem, perhaps used like a credit card and containing some of those people's skills? Sung-jae leaned in for a closer look and realized it resembled a personal credit card. He was worried using it would lead them to be tracked here, but Gyeon didn't care about that. Right now, all he wanted was to enjoy his sweets. Ignoring his nephew, who had no appetite, he kept eating bowl after bowl until Sung-hyuk suddenly appeared and greeted them. From the expressions on the uncle and nephew's faces, it was clear neither was happy to see the Gemini commander showing up there. He greeted Sung-jae, but then asked if he could join them to talk to Gyeon. Recognizing Sung-hyuk as the boss who'd been bothering Sung-jae recently, Gyeon didn't chase him away, letting him sit down instead. Sung-hyuk immediately asked if Gyeon was the one who killed the Spider Queen that Sung-jae had mentioned. Ignoring Gyeon's reluctance to answer, he remarked that even Yang Wei couldn't kill that spider, yet a young guy like him managed to, and that was quite impressive. So what now? What are you planning to do about it? Gyeon moved on to his third ice cream tub and then the fourth one back to back, while Sung-hyuk explained that he was here to recruit exceptional talents. It was clear he was trying to lure Gyeon into joining his holy faction, so Gyeon asked what he had to offer as a bribe. One of Lee Gyeon's 8 sacred relics was going to be auctioned off soon. If you're not too busy, how about discussing that with me a bit? Asked Sung-hyuk. Gyeon's interest was finally piqued. He put down his spoon and smirked, realizing that his own relics were being auctioned off. With ice cream smeared all over his face, he said he was ready to head straight to the auction. Choi Sung-hyuk didn't mock his simple, rural demeanor. Instead, he kindly explained that Lee Jian's relics would be auctioned at a far more upscale place quite a distance from here. It's the high peak auction in the sky, at a place called Drachma, the prosperous fortress city. The fortress city wasn't large, but being built on a floating island in the sky made it stand out. The place was lavishly decorated, and the drachma auction took place in a skyscraper dedicated to auctioning one-of-a-kind items. In the drachma waiting hall, Sophie was sitting on a bench, in shock, trying to breathe. She was dressed in a beautiful saintess outfit, but was trembling all over, her face pale as if she were sitting in the middle of a snowstorm. Then a gruff voice rumbled, "Stop looking like that. You're ruining the wine." It was Stephen Marker grumbling. Sophie glanced at the muscular man and inwardly cursed him as a brute, but for now, she had to hold back to avoid trouble. This was the man who had surpassed even Lee Jian. Being around Stephen Marker was the only thing that made Sophie feel safe. He stood up to leave, not forgetting to give his usual warning. All of Lee Jian's weapons at this auction are his, so don't even think about coveting them, or you'll regret it. She called after him in worry, but the Leo Saint didn't respond and walked away. Left alone in the grand hall, Sophie took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. After all, this was drachma. Whether the goods were real or fake, the person she feared most couldn't possibly show up here. But the person who caught her attention from across the glass was Hugo Otter, standing alone on the walkway. Her mood instantly shifted. She suddenly felt amused, thinking that this guy showed up just in time for some entertainment. Hugo wasn't here for the relics. He'd been wandering around for a while and still hadn't seen his friend Jian anywhere. He thought a place full of valuable relics would draw Jian's attention, so he came, only to be met by the Aquarius Saintess picking a fight. She nudged Hugo's shoulder from behind, grinning and saying, "Long time no see, huh?" The smiling face under Aquarius's hood sent a chill down Hugo's spine. Of all people to run into, it had to be Sophie Marty right now. Acting like an old friend catching up, she started with, "It's really hard to run into you, you know? Looks like even time couldn't beat you, huh? I remember you used to be a representative of the 12 Saints back in the day." Sophie never missed a chance to mock him, always holding a grudge that the Sagittarius faction was smaller and Hugo's rank was lower than the others. Hugo was still busy looking for his friend, so he didn't want to continue talking. He waved his hand dismissively, signaling for her to leave, but Sophie knew everything, except when to back off. With a smug expression, she spat out a sentence that made Hugo freeze. "You better be careful or you'll lose your child just like you lost your wife." Her fake smile grew wider as she relentlessly poked at the wound, repeatedly asking if he thought his wife was really dead. Hugo's silence only fueled her arrogance, pushing her further. "Even a saint like you, Sagittarius, would have to stand by and watch your family fall apart, right?" Sophie successfully provoked even the usually calm Hugo, igniting a burning fury within him. The spot where they stood erupted with a loud blast, tearing the wall apart. Through the cloud of black smoke, Hugo emerged, his entire body ablaze, eyes burning with rage. "I told you once, get lost." But Sophie wasn't one to back down so easily. She raised her hand to her mouth and giggled, using water to extinguish the flames on Hugo's arm while reminding him of the 10-year truce they agreed upon. "Don't forget that," she teased. In truth, seeing Hugo so enraged only made Sophie more delighted. She stepped closer and taunted, "Don't tell me you still don't realize that you're only half divine?" Before Sophie could fully summon her water powers again, a voice called out from behind, followed by a flash of white light. Jian had arrived, shouting, "Hey, pest!" With a quick snap of his fingers, he flicked Sophie's forehead, giving her a harsh dose of reality. The watermark on her forehead swelled red as her eyes rolled back, leaving only whites visible. Did she really gain some enlightenment, or did she just log out completely? Jian looked at Sophie's crumpled body on the ground with disgust, while his friend turned to face him. "Oh man, why did you have to show up at the most dramatic moment?" Hugo's concern was clear. He was worried that Jian had been up to no good, which was why he went looking for him. Confused, Jian crossed his arms and asked, "Do I look like a 3-year-old to you? Or is it that you have a crush on me?" Sensing the awkwardness in the air, Jian pulled his coat tighter and even clamped his butt cheeks together to keep a safe distance from Hugo. But he didn't forget to give a constipated look at the twisted body on the ground. Why do I run into this chick everywhere? Don't tell me she's got feelings for me? Hugo was speechless. This guy is definitely sick. In your eyes and others, Lee Jian might seem like a freak due to excessive enhancement, but to Sophie, he's much more than that. Aquarius thought she hated Jian, but in reality, she was terrified of him. She feared his face covered in deep scars and his aggressive demeanor. He never spared anyone who provoked him, and his blind, white eyes always cast a sharp, contemptuous look at Sophie, something she could never forget. On a stormy day more than 20 years ago, the temple of Aquarius was filled with the noise of his subordinates trying to keep Jian out. The housekeeper of the Aquarius mansion rushed out, spreading her arms, determined not to let him through. All she could see was his terrifying face illuminated by the lightning, and she could only scream one word, "Get out!" "What's going on?" Sophie's voice made him turn around to see her in her nightgown, irritably crossing her arms and asking what the hell he thought he was doing barging in there. With a bang, Li Jian slammed his bandaged fist into the wall behind Sophie, scaring her nearly to death. His eyes, blazing with anger, revealed the deep, dark scars as he growled, "Do you really want to die?" Aquarius tried her best to be tough, asking what kind of nonsense he was up to. This only drove Li Jian further mad, as he interrogated her about why she was still lingering in the temple when he had sent her back to the rear to treat those injured by the calamities. He tightened his grip on her arm, roaring, "Do you know that their limbs were severed while trying to protect you?" He said no more, grabbing her wrist and dragging her along, forcing Sophie to go save people. "No, even if those people die, no one will care. Dying for me and humanity is an honor. How dare you disregard a saint like this? I've endured enough of humanity's insults. I won't clean up that mess." Her stubborn words made Jian stop in his tracks. He turned his bandaged face towards her and asked, "What did you just say?" Covering her nose to avoid Jian's stench, Sophie insisted she would definitely not go to treat the injured. "I need to do my makeup and then prepare for an interview tomorrow." Throwing her wrist, which had been gripped tightly by Jian, away from him, Sophie continued to frown at the swollen spot from his tight grasp. Just then, Jian's hand flew out and slapped Aquarius, making her almost lose her teeth. He shouted angrily, his voice echoing throughout the temple, then dragged her off to treat the wounded until she was completely exhausted and fainted. To Sophie, Li Jian was a damn bastard. While she was cursing him furiously, Li Jian's face appeared, asking, "Did you sleep well, pest?" Sophie's eyes flew open as she realized she had just drooled in her sleep, her entire body strapped tightly to a chair. Facing her was Li Jian, with his familiar contemptuous face, and Hugo Otters standing beside him. Realizing she was in the hands of the one she feared the most, Aquarius screamed in terror, her cry echoing through the entire building. After she finished speaking, she continued to complain, "Who do you think you are doing to a saintess? Untie me now." No matter if it's 20 years or 200 years, the mouth of this woman seems like it never changes. Sophie's mind was racing, telling herself she wasn't afraid of him anymore, like 20 years ago, and today she would deal with him. Her hand glowed with the light of acid to melt the ropes. Sophie's plan was to escape and find Stephen Marker to teach them a lesson, but Jian gave her another bruise that would make her forehead split open. Shaking with anger, she bowed her head in fury. Li Jian's middle finger was still smoking, reminding her not to let her calculations show on her face. What's more, why was there smoke coming from his middle finger? Aquarius looked up, laughing heartily, and flaunted her acid defense skill, which activates whenever someone uses violence against her. She shouted with delight, imagining Jian's body being corroded by acid, making him kneel and beg for mercy. "Oh, the strongest skill, huh? I have something really strong too." He raised his middle finger to show her that the acid had disappeared, but he was no fool to flaunt his amazing self-healing abilities. This made Aquarius scream in horror, unable to believe her eyes. "All right, enough chatting. Let Li Jian settle the score with the things that happened between us, okay? I heard you claim to be my doctor? That's one punch. You are the one who sent the goon at the appraisal store. 5 punches. And what did you say to Taixu earlier? Another 50 punches." Seeing her miserable face, Jian kept his Buddha-like hand and asked, "Well, anything else to say?" After a while with no response, he moved his hand forward. "Wait for us then. If you're going to lose, you still have to get a punch in the forehead." Her endless cries of protest were ignored by Hugo, who didn't bother to intervene. That's how his silly friend was, whether male or female, everyone got beaten. Even though Lee Jeon had reasons to act this way, Hugo would never hit a woman, at most just breaking a wall like earlier. But wait, was it just his eyes playing tricks? Or was Jeon's divine power increasing with each snap of his fingers? Hugo wasn't mistaken. With every snap on Aquarius's forehead, he was absorbing her divine power. The invincible forehead slapper was getting more excited when Sophie suddenly collapsed in a puzzling manner, her forehead swollen and mouth foaming, showing she had fainted immediately. Jeon stopped his hand. A system message popped up in front of him, congratulating him on reaching 50% divine power and successfully unlocking the Holy Divine Power. What is this Holy Divine status? Explain it to me again, he asked the system. It was the power to maintain the Divine God's power. He has the ability to steal divine status from the disciples of other divine gods. When divine status falls to 0%, the corresponding zodiac loses their power and can lead to death if it remains at 0%. Jeon scratched his head in confusion. He had just snapped his fingers and taken 20% of the divine power from the Aquarius, but he hadn't received any when he had beaten Yang Wei before. Was it because he hadn't unlocked the skill at that time? Now, with the news that he could still increase his power, Jeon was pleased and no longer angry. The method of gaining power was straightforward. Just beat up others to take it. Hugo, standing behind, reminded him to interrogate the Aquarius about the dagger, but Jeon brushed it off, saying she was definitely not someone who would stab him in the back. Besides, he had already found someone capable of investigating for him. Hugo nodded, pretending to understand, but in his mind, he was criticizing his friend for just making excuses to torture the Aquarius. Suddenly, Jeon's phone buzzed in his pocket. Hugo leaned in curiously and asked where he got the phone. Jeon replied briefly that he borrowed it from an acquaintance and showed off his strong teeth. He said he was going to the auction hall and that Hugo could dispose of the Aquarius however he liked. With that, Jeon dashed off, leaving the cleanup to someone else. Left behind were Hugo and the Aquarius, who had been knocked out by Jeon's snaps. Suddenly, the door opened again. Hugo thought his friend had forgotten something, so he turned around, but the new arrival made him extremely nervous. With 8 billion people in the world, why did it have to be this bearded guy? In front of Hugo stood Stephen Marker. Stephen's eyes quickly recognized the unconscious Aquarius tied to the chair behind Hugo. Stephen took off his expensive golden glasses, looking very cool with his werewolf-like appearance, reminding Hugo that it had been a long time since they'd met, but there was no time for sentimentality. Electricity crackled around him as he looked at the Aquarius with disdain and said he and she had formed an alliance. That's the way it was. "Hey Hugo, what are you doing here?" The question was asked in a threatening tone. Hugo had no intention of explaining. He just said that went there for some business at the auction house, and that was none of his business. Stephen shoved his glasses into the chest of his tight-fitting shirt and with a smirk asked if Hugo had come for Jeon's relics. Oh, probably not, because if he had, he wouldn't have the money to buy them, right? Damn, even though Hugo was poor, it was clear that Stephen and the Aquarius were perfectly matched. Both seemed to enjoy highlighting Sagittarius's poverty. With a smile showing off his healthy teeth, Hugo asked Stephen if he was still collecting the relics created by Jeon. Ever since the ancient days when Jeon was one of the 13 saints, Stephen had always felt inferior to him. He used Jeon as a benchmark to strive past, and for a long time, he had been trying to collect all the relics related to him. Hey, don't tell me, do you think that continuing like this will make you as strong as Jeon? Stephen didn't say a word, but a surge of energy exploded from his body. Hugo's words clearly hit a sore spot. What was meant as a test turned into Stephen actually blowing away the floor. Hugo carefully called forth a flame to surround himself, but saw that Stephen's hands were crackling with electricity. He didn't strike Hugo, but grabbed his wrist, tightening the flames. Hugo's face turned pale as he felt Stephen's grip growing stronger. Stephen's eyes were fierce, warning him not to act recklessly. With each word Stephen spoke, his fingers clenched tighter, reminding Hugo that he was just a fool and shouldn't mention Jeon in front of him. As soon as he finished speaking, he twisted Hugo's arm and unleashed the image of the divine being behind him to prove that his power far surpassed that of the damned Jeon. Saint, there's trouble. An underling came to report that the Gemini are buying up all Jeon's items. Stephen was startled, threw Hugo aside, and immediately left with his subordinates. Hugo called out to Steven to take the Aquarius with him, but he didn't pay much attention, telling Hugo to do whatever he wanted. The top priority now was the auction. The girl could wait. Before leaving, Steven kindly reminded Hugo to control his personality carefully if he wanted to stay alive. Hugo smirked. "I'm so thankful I'm about to cry." Once Steven had left, Hugo dared to look at his hand, which was badly burned from the electric shock. The feeling of inferiority hit Hugo's heart. He knew he was in a bad place because he had always been the least capable among the blessed 12 zodiac signs. The drachma auction hall was dazzlingly lit up, like heaven, and the VIP room behind a glass corridor locked tight. In the auction area, the enthusiastic female MC was hammering down an item for Gemini, with a break coming up for the second round. The young men in the room cheered excitedly. Lee Jeon just got another cool item. Hyuk, sitting beside him, congratulated him on getting what he wanted. Jeon scratched his head awkwardly and thanked him. Thanks to his invitation to the VIP room, Jeon was able to gather all these items. Choi Sung-hyuk, adjusting his glasses, reiterated that this was all to recruit him to the Gemini Holy Order, completely ignoring Sung-jae beside him, reminding him how he had already spent billions. He glanced at Sung-jae and asked him to pay for the drinks, since he had forgotten his card. Not daring to defy his boss, Sung-jae was about to search his bag for money when Jeon held up a black card, saying comfortably, "This time, it's on me." Sung-hyuk reached into the empty bag, surprised that Jeon had gotten a black card without him knowing. Jeon waved the card and reminded him seriously, "Anyway, you shouldn't let subordinates pay for things, right?" Sung-hyuk, embarrassed by the direct comment, didn't dare to argue. He agreed verbally, but realized that although this guy seemed inexperienced, he liked to boss others around. Still, he managed to defeat the Spider Queen. Choi Sung-hyuk's mission is to recruit this talent for his holy order. After waiting a bit, when Jeon had drunk enough, Sung-hyuk began the main topic of the day, with a long string of praise for Jeon's potential as S or even SS rank. If blessed by the Aries order, he would definitely become incredibly strong. Jeon took a sip of his drink and noticed the faint purple mist Sung-hyuk had released, which seemed to manipulate others' emotions. Like a scammer promising $1,000 for joining a club, Sung-hyuk used all his persuasive skills to entice Jeon. He spoke of wealth, honor, and career glory. Everything would be his if he joined the Aries order. All of it was free of charge. Joining the order would grant even more power than I have. Come on, grab my hand, and become one of the disciples of the great Aries. It sounded grand and convincing, but suddenly Jeon burst into laughter, feeling elated. What a great speech today, it's so fun. He suddenly changed his tone and asked, "So you're saying Jeon should become a lackey of a poor divine god?" Choi Sung-hyuk felt sweat trickling down his forehead. The young man who was relaxed earlier now seemed to be angry. He was about to change the subject to cool the atmosphere when a staff member from the auction hall came in, asking to deliver the successfully auctioned item. Looking at the nonsense the staff member was presenting, he thought, "It's my item. Why are they still talking about sending an authorization letter later?" At that moment, Choi Sung-hyuk realized he had just closed a deal for an item from the St. Lee Jeon. He smiled, holding up a necklace with an 8-shaped pendant, saying it was quite useful for him. Sung-hyuk thought he was foolish. He had been careless for a moment, and now this young man had auctioned Steven's item. If that guy came in and punched everyone, it would be disastrous. He was about to advise Jeon to return it when suddenly, the VIP room door exploded into pieces. The thick smoke made all four turn to see Steven storming in, mumbling curses about that damned guy. He looked more tense than a thief who had just lost his beloved dog, growling, "Who touched my stuff?" "Oh, it's someone I know." Jeon turned to see the thug who had kicked the door open, half surprised, half not, recognizing that this was the one hunting his holy items. Choi Sung-hyuk stepped forward, trying to act as the diplomatic king, apologizing in every way, blaming it on the country bumpkin's ignorance. Seeing the leader's reduced aggression, Steven was somewhat appeased as long as the items were returned. Choi Sung-hyuk suggested that Steven go to the reception to pay and collect the item. Unexpectedly, Steven smirked wickedly, grabbing Sung-hyuk by the head and asking, "You're trying to mess with my stuff and then run away, huh?" He trembled under Steven's big hand, not daring to resist, cursing silently. "This big guy is looking for an excuse to take my stuff without paying. Hey, stop barking at me." Jeon's voice from the sofa made them both turn to look. I won the auction and bought it, so why are you being so unreasonable? If you like it so much, I'll sell it to you for 200 billion plus protection fees, okay? Stephen didn't know who this cocky guy was, but burst out laughing a few seconds later. I didn't expect someone from the Ares order to be so mouthy. Choi Sung-hyuk felt like he was about to collapse. This kid was asking for trouble, daring to provoke even the Lion Saint? Men are supposed to be like this. If you don't have anything on you, what the hell are you doing talking to me? Stephen pushed Sung-hyuk aside and moved menacingly towards Jeon. This guy, who was throwing out electric sparks, was trying to play the introduction game? And now I'll introduce myself with the most prestigious neck-cracking move, always full of electric charge. Smirking provocatively, Jeon asked what kind of weird barking this guy was doing. In his mind, he thought this guy might actually be able to show off, much stronger than before. Indeed, the zodiac sign is very suitable for combat, always ready for a fight. The king of beasts, although not as persistent and enduring in battle as Aries or Aquarius, had made significant progress. One couldn't help but praise Leo's skill. Once they flaunt their power, no matter what you say, they have to tear their opponent apart to satisfy their anger, right? Jeon wanted to see what would happen when a lion clawed at a snake. Getting worked up means you're just shitting yourself. He wanted to give Stephen that advice, but didn't say it, letting the large hand come rushing towards him. As Stephen's large fingers touched Jeon's shoulder, the electric sparks stirred up the atmosphere, making everyone around scared out of their wits, wanting to run away. It seemed like a one-way trip, with Sung-jae still trying to scream out, "Oh, my brother." While Sung-hyuk was mentally chanting, "It's over now," Stephen had no intention of killing him, just planning to lightly paralyze his legs so he'd need a wheelchair. Yet strangely, the young man in front of him had a relaxed smile on his lips, shouting, "Hey, are you dusting off my clothes?" Stephen couldn't understand what had just happened because the technique he used should have directly impacted this person, leaving no chance to dodge. "Did you use teleportation to redirect my attack?" Gemini are the best at this, but Jeon isn't. He pushed Stephen away and continued to curse, calling him a brainless fool with overdeveloped limbs. "Ha ha, your shattering stone skill has been nullified by me. Do you have any other skills that can affect me? I remember you once begged me to teach you to save humanity, and now you're flaunting your power like a clown? Not to mention the murderous aura emanating from Jeon. Only the 13th Saint and Stephen knew about this story, so Stephen was puzzled about who this guy was. Suddenly, the auction hall announced, "Welcome back to the second round." And Stephen shifted his attention there, ignoring Jeon. He turned away, pointed at Jeon, and said that the auction was an important matter that needed to be dealt with first, telling him to hold onto that necklace tightly and he would come back later. As Stephen left, Sung-jae immediately ran to check if he was missing anything. The only damage was a torn shoulder, like it was bitten by a dog, which Sung-hyuk saw but dared not approach to ask. How did he dodge such a divine-level attack from Stephen? Even a level S commander like Sung-hyuk couldn't do that. The strange nonchalance only made Sung-hyuk more curious about who this young man was. In the second round of the auction, the host immediately flexed that this was a holy relic everyone had been eagerly waiting to see. Surely everyone remembers the Berlin incident 24 years ago on an island in Germany. A strange mist lingered in the area, melting all kinds of weapons and towers, so terrifying that 12 saints couldn't enter the area except for the hero Lee Jeon. Now, we will reveal the holy relic that Lee Jeon used to subdue the plague. Stephen couldn't help but smile, waiting for that item to finally be in his hands. He remembered the day 24 years ago, on that impregnable island in Germany. Helicopters hovered over the island, continuously updating news. It had been 4 days since Lee Jeon entered, and no one knew what was inside since he hadn't come out. Many saints, including Stephen, tried to enter, but the farthest they could reach was the edge of the central area. Stephen was unwilling to accept that Jeon could enter alone while he couldn't, despite being well-equipped and having an escort. He sat there for a long time, trying to figure out why he and that scarred bastard were so different in power. Suddenly, his subordinate pointed to the right and reported that Lee Jeon had returned, bringing something that Stephen was sure was the answer he had been searching for all this time. The reporters were astonished as they saw Lee Jeon walking out, completely intact, carrying a huge bone. At that time, Lee Jeon always wore a mask when going outside, to avoid scaring the elderly and children. Another achievement was stolen by Li Jian, but this time Stephen didn't get angry. He seemed to have realized something important and simply ordered his men to retreat. When his men saw the saint throw his weapon aside, they were surprised and learned that Stephen had something better for himself. As soon as Stephen saw Li Jian walk out, he knew the answer. The thing that would allow him to stand on equal footing with Li Jian was a weapon. So now, in the auction hall, when they unveiled the most powerful weapon Li Jian had used in the Berlin Wolf battle, everyone's attention was focused on it. Li Jian also looked to see what it was. As the cloth was pulled away, Stephen couldn't help but smile. It was the very thing he had been waiting for to become unrivaled. The huge bone that Li Jian had carried when leaving the Misty Island. Outside the Drachma Tower where the grand auction was taking place, under the moonlight, a strange creature jumped down. It was clearly a Bane, landing silently on top of the tower. It had come here for Li Jian's sacred artifact, but, not having the money to buy it, was now scheming to get a free ride. Introducing the Wonderland Wolf Bone. The camera zoomed in on the huge bone, causing the audience to gasp in amazement. They had only seen it in history books before and never thought they'd see it in person. This meant that the textbook saying this was Li Jian's classic weapon was true, although it seemed exaggerated. The MC flaunted this item, and the crowd roared 10 times louder. Meanwhile, he stood there reminiscing about the event 24 years ago. It was true that he used that bone to fight the Bane, but did it reach such a divine level? Just as he was about to call Sung Jae to inform his nephew of the truth, he was met with a loud response. "Busy, talk later." Both Sung Jae and Sung Hyuk were disheartened, as the Gemini Saint's order couldn't acquire this item. The Wonderland Wolf Bone started with a price of $1 million, and the bidding went wild from 5 to 10, then skyrocketed to $30–50 million. With the price increase, the system continuously reported that Jian's fame and experience points were rising to the point where they could crush him. Still feeling puzzled, he was about to ask why everyone was fighting so fiercely over the Wonderland Wolf Bone, wondering if they were buying it to lick, when Sung Jae immediately scolded him. Sung Jae thought he was an uncultured fool, but everything used by the hero Li Jian, whether it was a toothpick or a pair of farming sandals, caused people to go crazy. He pointed out Stephen Marker as a collector of Li Jian's divine weapons worldwide. Since the Lion Saint was an overpowering fighter, everyone tried to avoid offending him during divine weapon auctions. The thought that most of Li Jian's divine weapons ended up in Stephen's collection was frustrating, but he consoled himself by thinking that all the auction profits would go into Li Jian's government-managed account. Wait, pause for about 5 seconds, meaning no matter who buys it, the money goes into my pocket? Okay, whoever wants to buy, bid higher. Jian will never question why the audience loves spending money on the dog bone anymore. He enjoyed the feeling as the amount rose from 70 to 90, then to $100 million in his pocket. Suddenly, a roar came from the audience. 1 billion! While Jian was chewing on popcorn, Sung Jae suddenly bit down hard, his eyes wide, Sung Hyuk's eyes wide, and everyone looked dumbfounded towards the person who had called out that amount. Who else but Stephen, with both hands in his pockets, walking down and repeating with a smug face, "Did you not hear me? I will buy it right now for $1 billion. The MC above was still in shock, stammering, 1 billion, 1 billion. The audience, having pulled out all their hair and sold everything they had, couldn't match that sum. How could anyone compete with Stephen? Sung Jae was unwilling, Sung Hyuk was unsatisfied, and Jian was incredibly anxious. Finally, the gavel came down with a bang, sealing the deal. The Wonderland Wolf Bone was officially sold for $1 billion. In the hallway, some janitors were pushing carts to clean up, discussing the bone that had been bought for $1 billion. One person clicked his tongue, saying that people like him could never dream of even a fraction of that money, wishing for something big to change in life. Just as he finished speaking, both of them heard a noise. Outside the glass of the Drachma building was the face of the Bane, glaring inside. They hoped it wasn't responding to their prayers by showing up. If this move was wrong, they would retract their previous statement. Inside the auction hall, Stephen had successfully acquired the weapon of his dreams. The new owner of the Wonderland Wolf Bone was now revealed to the eager eyes of everyone present in the audience. As they cheered and celebrated, suddenly the entire ceiling collapsed, burying a bunch of people who were cheering. Stephen walked over to see what it was, still carrying the $1 billion bone. From the large hole emerged some menacing shadow, with eyes shining brighter than headlights. The audience screamed and ran as if their pants were falling off, leaving the Bane like a titan with a horse's face, searching for Legion's sacred artifact. Nothing was scarier than winning an auction for your favorite item only to have someone swoop in to steal it. The Bane opened its long, fang-filled mouth, targeting Stephen, who was holding the bone, and dove down. Naturally, Stephen wasn't afraid of anyone. His eyes lit up as he swung one end of the bone at the Bane, sending it flying backward, much like a baseball player hitting a massive ball, smashing through two buildings in succession. Stephen's boisterous laughter echoed amidst the chaos. "This is the first time I've got to thank a Bane for showing up. Ha ha!" The wolf bone, without a display case, was now beside Stephen, who looked extremely handsome. He was thrilled to experience the power of the coveted sacred artifact, and even if more Bane came, it was fine. But as he had just opened his mouth to laugh, Stephen had to stop immediately. The tower across from them was collapsing uncontrollably after being hit by the huge Bane. It was the teleportation tower, and if it fell, it would blow away the entire island beneath. Indeed, the contractor who built that tower must have cut corners on the materials. As the upper part exploded, the lower part also exploded, and debris rained down on people strolling below. It was the national holiday, and they were happily out with their crush. But what was this? Among the crowd, a girl screamed that if all the debris fell on the island, it would collapse. "All the disciples, let's unite our strength to stop it," an elderly said. People from different holy orders nearby, hearing the SOS signal, spoke up and joined forces to help. The scene was like All My Dear members extending their period by another 6 months. Hundreds of people below gathered their strength into a ball, pouring all their energy into it, creating a magnificent sight. But after just a few seconds, they realized that even if they gather all their mana, it wouldn't be enough to hold up. The falling debris from the tower scared everyone, and they all fled to save their lives. Hugo roared, "The wrath of Apollo." Above them, a swirling firestorm appeared, incinerating all the remains of the tower. After the flames subsided, the people below realized they had been perfectly saved, with not a single piece of debris left. It turned out to be the Sagittarius Saint, Hugo Otters, flying above with his brilliant flaming bow. It had been a long time since he had the chance to make a grand appearance before the public, waving and receiving their thanks, while not forgetting to curse the damn Lion Saint for his lack of control. Suddenly, not far away, a violent explosion was heard. Another Bane, a different color, emerged from the ground and started wading towards the crowd. It resembled a dog stripped of its skin, with a skeletal armor-like outer layer. Hugo shivered, realizing this was a different Bane from the earlier one, and feared that this place would become a battlefield. From the mouth of the Bane poured out a thick, viscous liquid, initially looking like blood but darker. It spread across the ground and suddenly surged up like living creatures attacking the people. They clung to the faces of the unfortunate, growing long and covering their eyes, noses, and mouths, rendering them immobile. Hugo's eyes blazed with fury. How dare these beasts harm the people right under the eyes of the celestial god? He drew his bow, preparing to shoot an arrow, but heard a fierce roar behind him. Hugo turned around, but couldn't avoid the gaping, tooth-filled mouth of the blue Bane that Stephen had punched away earlier. Hugo's eyes widened in shock, almost in tears. "Oh, my friend, you're here." Taixu turned around, his eyes widening in astonishment. His pupils shrank, his brows furrowed tightly, and his teeth clenched as he saw a blue calamity right behind him. The creature's mouth, filled with sharp crocodile-like teeth, gaped open, ready to turn him into its dinner. Taixu couldn't react in time to dodge, so he could only stare in terror at the jaws of the vicious calamity. Just when he thought he'd done for, a powerful force struck the side of the calamity, sending it flying. It was Legion, using his powerful kick to save Taixu from danger. He shouted in his friend's face, "Hey, oh Taixu, get a grip already." Then he put more strength into his kick, sending the calamity flying even farther. The creature didn't have time to fight back and flew away. Landing beside Legion, Taixu looked at him with grateful eyes and a bright smile, thanking him. But instead of a warm response, he got a cold splash of reality and a non-stop insults. "Hey, aren't you still a saint when it comes to combat? How are you weaker than a bottom class like me? I feel so uneasy. Seriously, man. My God, oh Taeksu! Even a worm will turn when trodden on too much, and with the harsh scolding, Taeksu stood up and snapped back. You keep yapping on. I'm doing my best here. The argument escalated, growing more intense, when suddenly a loud shout echoed through the sky, cutting off the heated exchange between the two close friends. Lee Gyeon and Oh Taek-soo turned their heads towards the source of the noise, spotting Steven charging at them with a white bone in hand, his body crackling with sparks of electricity. His face was twisted in anger, veins bulging all over his body, looking like a furious gorilla. With his mouth wide open, Steven roared, "How dare you guys interrupting my divine artifact experience?" Steven shouted so loudly that even the calamity hiding nearby had to lift its head and roar in response, as if providing background noise. Jian just remembered there's another crazy saint here too. Lightning started spreading everywhere, and both he and Hugo were there dumbfounded, watching Steven charge toward the two calamities like a madman. Once again, he yelled out, "Don't get in the way of me and Big Bone's performance." The lightning grew thicker and thicker, and Lee Gyeon was left wondering, why has he gone crazy again? But Taek-soo seemed to have figured it out. The closer Steven got, the angrier he looked, raising his hand to use the royal skill, summoning a golden shield that covered the entire sky, completely enclosing some people and one of the calamities inside. Standing confidently outside the shield with one of the calamities, Steven grinned. The stage has now been set. He was eager to try out his new weapon, which he had bought for $1 billion. People often say, you get what you pay for, and he believed this bone was a 1 in a million treasure. With one hand in his pocket and the other carrying the massive bone, Steven boldly faced the calamity without a trace of fear. The crowd, struggling against the calamity, cheered up when they saw him appear. Oh, it's Steven, the strongest saint who has surpassed Lee Gyeon. The cheers grew louder and louder, encouraging Steven as he approached the blue calamity, dragging the white bone alongside him, mumbling, "Now it's time to pay for you to pay the price for going berserk. Brace yourself." With his muscular arms, he raised the massive bone high, and with fierce energy, he slammed it down. The sound of it cutting through the air echoed. The atmosphere suddenly froze, and he realized something was off. The crowd around him also felt something was wrong. Even the calamity seemed to sense it wasn't right. He had hit the target, but something was odd. Steven lifted the bone off the calamity's head, moved it to the right, then to the left, examining it from above and below. The calamity even kindly helped him check it out. Scratching his head in confusion, he returned to his fighting stance, and once again, Steven swung the bone at the monster's head. 1 strike, 2 strikes, then 3, each blow accompanied by a standard superhero versus monster battle cry. But every attack was no more than a light scratch for the calamity. It roared in annoyance, swinging its paw into Steven's face, distorting it and sending him. He wondered why Lee Gyeon's weapon wasn't working. Clearly, he felt that his attacks have landed, but Lee Gyeon lightly touched the shield Steven had created, realizing that for now, he couldn't get out because that brute had used his royal skill. Cracking his knuckles, Gyeon angrily cursed, "I won't let him go if we get out of here," to which Hugo replied, remarking that a bastard Steven was to think of using a royal skill on them. There was another problem to worry about, which was that there were 2 calamities. If one was with Steven, then the other would be stuck with the group of people trapped inside the royal skill. Before they could punch that red freak in the face, the 2 of them had to deal with the horde of aimless people at their feet. They were being controlled by the calamity, turned into puppets blocking the way. It seemed a bit tricky to get rid of that sticky stuff without harming the townspeople. Taek-soo gritted his teeth, trying to think of a way to free them from the monster's control without killing them. As they drew closer, Taek-soo noticed his friend confidently turn and smile. "I think we've got to go head on for this, huh?" Hugo just lost it. "What? How? Do you have something in mind?" Lee Gyeon yawning as he moved forward. "Not really. We'll just wing it." Taek-soo rushed to stop him, realizing his friend was heading in the wrong direction because Lee Gyeon had walked straight into the biting range of a zombie. Showing no emotion, he lazily reached out and grabbed the head of the possessed man, his eyes flashing dangerously as his other hand tore off the black slime clinging to the man's body like pulling apart cotton candy. Taek-soo was horrified, thinking his friend was ripping off the man's clothes in broad daylight. The calamity also stared, confused about what Gyeon was doing. After lowering his hand, Gyeon smiled triumphantly, looking at the unconscious man who was oblivious to everything around him. Taeksu watched the sludge that Jian had tossed to the ground, crawling around as if looking for a new host, not understanding how Jian could just grab it and pull it off like that. Arrogantly, Jian uttered 3 words, by sheer strength, leaving Taeksu saying, "I won't be able to do it then. I'm not stupidly strong, like a certain someone." He turned around, pointed at his friend, and laughed mockingly. "Didn't I tell you earlier that you were weak, but you wouldn't believe me?" Every word was like a slap in the face to Taeksu, who wondered if this guy would die if he spoke a bit more nicely. But then he sighed, knowing that since Li Jian had already decided to charge straight into the enemy's lair, all he could do was support him rather than try to stop him. Wasting no more time, a red aura surrounded Taeksu, while a green aura emanated from Li Jian, both looking extremely fierce. Their demeanor changed, and their pupils shifted colors, just like they were about to go beat someone up. With renewed vigor, Taeksu said, "You're still going to charge ahead, aren't you? Then leave the cover to me." Li Jian sighed. "Taeksu, you really haven't changed." The two became incredibly excited, not just because they were about to fight the calamity, but also because it had been a long time since they last teamed up. Now they had the chance to fight side by side again. These 2 middle-aged men stormed in like they were back in the old days, one charging ahead while the other provided cover. It had been a while since they fought together, and it felt exhilarating. Taeksu raised the flaming bow of the sun god Apollo, aiming straight at the calamity and the people under its control. Li Jian reminded him, "Let's not drag this out and finish this quickly." With that, he kicked off the ground, flying into the air, landing amidst a group of people controlled by the calamity. As soon as his feet touched the ground, a powerful blue light radiated out, cracking the earth beneath him and instantly blasting the slime off the innocent people. The calamity roared and launched another wave of black slime toward Li Jian. Moving like lightning, he dashed forward, knocking the black slime away wherever it attacked. The sludge was like mosquito bites on stainless steel, completely ineffective. Suddenly, the slime stopped targeting Li Jian and turned its focus toward the townspeople in the distance. But its intention was quickly thwarted when an arrow from Taeksu shot through the air, burning all the black slime to ashes. In the smoke, in his demigod form, Taeksu declared that they should dream on if they thought they could harm anyone. Charging at the other calamity, Jian kept praising his beloved friend. "Good job." He slid down, just out of the reach of the catastrophe, arrogantly taunting, "Hey, Skullface, stop trying to put up a fight." Li Jian moved too fast, catching the catastrophe off guard. Before it could react, the human was already delivering a blazing punch straight to its stomach, launching it high into the sky in a twisted shape, accompanied by a massive "Get lost!" The ground shook, rocks flew up with the huge beast. The catastrophe howled in pain, its bones cracked, and its entire body quickly shattered into pieces. Meanwhile, Li Jian stood there, striking a cool pose, showing off his masculine 6-pack abs. Taeksu excitedly ran over. "Wow, you end it in an instant." He knew his friend liked to flex, but that punch was just too impressive not to praise. The hole Li Jian created was deep, with several people lying around it, thankfully unharmed by the sticky substance and likely to wake up soon. Suddenly, Li Jian's palm began to glow, or rather, the snake symbol in his palm glowed, and a series of information panels appeared before him. "You have ripped apart a calamity with your bare hands. You have gathered divine power. Divine power charging. Current divine power, 81% completed. Total absorbed divine power has exceeded 70%. Would you like to use the divine power you have charged up to use Battle God Instinct Level 1? Choose yes or no." Battle God Instinct. So it's a skill that can only be used after charging divine power past a certain amount? He let out a sigh. "All right, let's try it out and see what's so great about it." While Li Jian had finished, Stephen was still struggling with the catastrophe using the white bone fragment. Watching himself struggle against a single catastrophe, he frowned and cursed under his breath. Why isn't Big Bone working? He couldn't believe things had turned out this way, nor did he understand why the Holy Bone was useless against this creature. Could it be that he wasn't fully utilizing the true power of the Holy Bone, or was it because he was weaker than the beast? From the outside, it looked like Stephen was losing. Those around him began to panic, unsure of what to do next. If their savior was in such a dire state and the catastrophe turned on them, they'd all be dead. Suddenly, one of them exclaimed, "Wait a second, Look over there. From the barrier, blue and black lightning bolts intertwined, creating a powerful energy mass. Lee Gyeon was tearing through the barrier created by Steven's zodiac technique. He looked even scarier than a raging bull searching for its prey. Steven was shocked, unable to believe his eyes, completely unprepared for Lee Gyeon to become so terrifying. The catastrophe sensed the overwhelming power emanating from the newcomer, a force so strong it could crush even it. To avoid being left in the dirt, it opened its mouth and lunged at Lee Gyeon, hoping to catch him off guard. Lee Gyeon raised his head and glared at the reckless catastrophe, his eyes flashing with murderous intent. He shouted at it, "Shut it!" His powerful aura suppressed all living beings, even forcing the catastrophe to the ground, wailing in pain. The bystanders who had been cheering for Steven were also affected, the wind blowing fiercely as if to sweep them all away from the 100-meter radius. Steven knelt, struggling to stay on his feet, but still sliding backward. The catastrophe was pinned to the ground, crying out in agony until Lee Gyeon stood before its massive body. In its last breaths, it gasped, "How could a human possess such authority? Could it be that you aren't human?" Lee Gyeon looked at it with disdain. "What nonsense are you spouting?" His foot stomped down, shaking the earth, and with a terrifying force, the loquacious catastrophe was blown to pieces right before Steven's astonished eyes. Steven's eyes widened, unable to believe what he was seeing. How could this happen? Such terrifying power. Only that bastard should have it. Could it be? He hesitated, unable to finish his thought. But at that moment, he knew the man before him was the same Lee Gyeon from years ago. "So glad to meet you, you lion bastard." Lee Gyeon, veins bulging, approached with a wicked smile. "You sure enjoyed trampling on my name all these years, didn't you?" Steven couldn't stop trembling, collapsing to the ground, stammering, "No way, it can't be you." He swung the bone fragment at Lee Gyeon, but his attempt was futile as Lee Gyeon easily blocked it with one hand. With a tone of contempt, Lee Gyeon sneered, "Geez, you sure seem to be having a lot of fun with this thing." Strangely, Steven, known as the strongest saint, couldn't escape the grasp of that man, even when using all his strength. Lee Gyeon tightened his grip, effortlessly crushing the bone fragment right before Steven's eyes. "What now? It was just a mutt bone that's a little big. Oh my god, damn it, my billion-dollar bone." Steven's face was a picture of shock, his mouth agape, eyes wide open. Lee Gyeon laughed heartily, swinging a powerful fist at the insolent man before him. "You sure have been hitting me hard, huh? Well, it's my turn now." Steven barely managed to utter "Dim it" before he was hit with all the pain. One punch from Lee Gyeon sent him flying through the floating island, rocks scattering everywhere, his small figure shooting away as if the obstacles were mere air, only managing to curse one more time before disappearing from sight. Inside the auction house, the Aquarius saintess slowly woke up, bewildered as to why she was lying on the ground, with no memory of what had just happened before she fainted. Her necklace briefly glowed with a green magical light before returning to normal, unnoticed by her. Where Steven was punched, a deep, tunnel-like hole remained. The one responsible for it all was still laughing triumphantly, casually reminding everyone that the fun was far from over. Every time they met, he would keep punching. Oh, Tae-soo ran over to check on Steven, unsure if he could climb back up, but he didn't care much about that, only knowing that the big guy wouldn't die. Satisfied with his revenge, Gyeon finally turned to his friend and asked, "Are the people in the barrier okay?" Tae-soo nodded. "Yeah, they're all cheering back there." With nothing else on his mind, Lee Gyeon snapped his fingers, summoning the Ares divine beast and ordering it to collect all the valuables before they left. While the beast was busy looting, Gyeon told his friend about his second teammate who had lent him a phone. Oh, Tae-soo was extremely eager to know who it was, but when he heard the name Sung Jae, he felt like he'd been struck by lightning on a clear day, needing to ask again just to be sure. "Sung Jae? Cheon Sung Jae? I got it right, didn't I?" Gyeon confirmed. "He's from the Gemini Guild, with stable magical power, more than capable of being a saintly guild leader. Plus, that kid's smart and quick, overall, very reliable." Oh, Tae-soo scratched his head in frustration, wondering how his precious son had gotten involved with this troublemaker. He had been so careful to keep his son and his best friend from meeting. Two fanboys meeting their idol would definitely ruin his beloved family. Just as Lee Gyeon suggested calling the Gemini Guild leader to use instant teleportation, Oh Tae-soo suddenly objected. His mind raced. "Wait, let's just go. You should be sick of those guys already. Why would you bother getting involved with them?" Lee Gyeon had to agree. Memories of his encounters with the Gemini Guild flashed through his mind like a movie reel. They always got mad at him. Taeksu added fuel to the fire to stop Jian from meeting the Gemini Guild. Apologizing to his son in his mind, he thought, "Sorry, Sungjae." Lee Jian's face hardened while Taeksu was sweating bullets, trying to protect his happy family. He patted his friend's shoulder, trying to manipulate him into forgetting about the Gemini folks. But before he could finish, a frantic voice calling "Dad" froze him in place. Well, it seems everything was destined. The two turned around, and Taeksu still couldn't believe the voice was his son's. The troublemaking boy stood behind them, suspiciously asking, "Could it be that, by Jian, you meant Lee Jian?" Taeksu's face was utterly shocked upon seeing Sungjae, wondering why on earth the boy had to appear at this moment. He wanted to deny it, but his son was already excitedly pushing him for a quick answer. Oh, Taeksu was stumbling over his words, still not sure how to explain things properly when a roar suddenly came from behind. A mass of black liquid crawled close to the group, then unexpectedly shot straight toward Lee Jian, aiming to attack him. Out of nowhere, Lime popped out from under his arm, opened its mouth wide, and swallowed the whole thing, looking quite delighted as if it had just eaten something delicious. A notification appeared in front of Lee Jian. Divine Artifact Omnificent Mud Bundle has gained poison resistance. Skill Body of 100 Poison. S-Scope has expanded. Poison resistance will have basic effects when crafting sacred artifacts. Not only were the father and son staring in shock, but even Lee Jian was speechless. He shook Lime, feeling a headache coming on, cursing at the crazy thing. "How starved are you to eat some random crap you found on the ground? Spit it out! Hurry up!"